13 cases, 7 levels, 1 disturbing true crime iceberg. We're diving deep into the darkest parts of humanity, where we'll start off bad, but then somehow find a way to get even worse. Now it's time for us to jump into depravity once again. Love you. July 29th, 1999. It was an ordinary winter's day in Western Australia's Wheatbelt region. The sun sat high, casting long shadows over the red dirt roads that stretched endlessly towards the horizon. For 17-year-old Hayley Dodd, it was a case of another day, another adventure. She had been hitchhiking, something that she'd done before, as she made her way towards a friend's house in the quiet town of Mora. And then, without warning, she vanished. The last confirmed sighting of Hayley was at around 11:40 a.m, walking along the northwest road near the small town of Badginara. She had been spotted by a passing driver, her petite frame dwarfed by the vast landscape around her. But after that moment, to all intents and purposes, Hayley simply ceased to exist. She never arrived at her friend's house, and she never contacted her family ever again. The Dodd family knew something was wrong almost immediately. Hayley wasn't the type of person to disappear without a word. She was described as bubbly and independent, but she was also very reliable. When she failed to make contact, alarm bells began ringing. Her mother, Margaret Dodd, called the police, and this would set in motion what would become one of Western Australia's longest-running missing persons cases. For days, volunteers and officers scoured the countryside. Helicopters hovered low over the landscape, their downdraft kicking up dust as they searched for any trace of Hayley. Tracker dogs followed the faintest of scents, but they led to nothing. It seemed like the land had swallowed Hayley whole, leaving only questions in her place. Hope turned to desperation. The days stretched into weeks and then months. The town of Badginara fell silent, and the search teams dwindled. As the years passed, the case grew cold. But in 2013, nearly 14 years after Hayley's disappearance, a single piece of evidence would emerge: an earring. It had been found embedded deep in the fabric of an old car seat cover, a car once driven by a man named Francis John Walk. And in that moment, everything changed. Francis John Walk was no stranger to the law. By 2013, when police reopened Hayley's case, Walk was already behind bars in Queensland, serving time for an eerily similar crime. In 2007, he had picked up a 31-year-old woman on a remote road, just as Hayley had probably been picked up years before. However, this woman lived to tell the tale. She had been terribly assaulted, her body battered and broken, and then somehow she managed to escape his grip. Walk had been sentenced to 12 years in prison for that attack, but now police began to wonder if his crimes had stretched even further back. In 1999, at the time of Hayley's disappearance, Walk had been living in a remote property near Badginara. He was a reclusive figure, well known in the area, but not well liked. He had an unsettling presence, the kind of man that people instinctively avoided. When Hayley vanished near his property, Walk had been questioned, but he provided an alibi. He claimed he had been running errands in Mora, 50 kilometres away. With no evidence to the contrary, police had little choice but to let him go. But when investigators re-examined the evidence in 2013, they found something that had been otherwise overlooked. That was the single earring.
Walk has always denied having anything to do with Hayley's disappearance. He wasn't charged until 2015 after a cold case review of the evidence discovered an earring, believed to have belonged to Hayley, in the fibres of a car seat cover seized in 1999 from the vehicle Walk was driving.
The earring closely matched the sketches of the jewellery that Hayley had been wearing on the day that she disappeared. It was the break that investigators desperately needed.
Liam, he was on a Qantas flight and that landed about 3 o'clock this afternoon. He was loaded into a white van and taken straight to Hakea Prison. In June, police had issued an arrest warrant for Walk. They suspect him of abducting and murdering 17-year-old Hayley Dodd near Badgingarra.
In 2015, Walk was charged with Hayley's murder. He was then extradited to Western Australia to stand trial, accused of abducting and killing the teenager in a carnally motivated attack. However, with no body and no eyewitnesses, this case was far from simple. What followed was a years-long legal battle that would test the limits of forensic evidence, of justice, and of a family's unrelenting pursuit of truth. Hayley's mother, Margaret Dodd, campaigned relentlessly for answers. She wanted to keep her daughter's name alive in the public eye, and now that small piece of jewellery gave the breakthrough that she so desperately wanted. When Francis John Walk finally stood trial in 2018, Hayley Dodd's family filled the courtroom, hoping for long overdue justice. Prosecutors laid out the evidence, the earring found in his vehicle, the disturbing parallels to his past crimes, and the simple fact that he was one of the last people known to be in the area when Hayley disappeared. Thankfully, the trial ended in a guilty verdict for murder, and Ward was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 21 years. For Hayley's family, it was the justice that they had been fighting for, but it was not the closure that they desperately needed. Her body was still, after all, missing, and this ordeal was far from over. In 2020, a devastating blow was dealt. Wart's conviction was overturned on appeal, with the court ruling that a legal error had been made in finding him guilty. A retrial was ordered, sending Hayley's family back into a painful legal battle, one that, by now, had already consumed 2 decades of their lives. The second trial, held in 2022, ended differently. The jury now acquitted Walk of murder, but they did find him guilty of manslaughter. The ruling suggested they believed that he was responsible for Hayley's passing, but they could not be certain that he did this on purpose. For this new crime, Walk received an 18-year sentence, and this was the longest manslaughter sentence in Western Australian history. He will be eligible for parole in 2035. But a new law, one being pushed for by Hayley's mother, could keep him behind bars indefinitely. Under the no body, no parole law, Walk would not be released until he reveals where Hayley's remains lay. Outside the courtroom, Margaret Dodd made one final plea. Tell us where she is. You know what you did. Be a man and stop making us suffer. Walk, however, remained silent. And so, for Hayley's family, the fight continues. I, for one, think the no body, no parole law should be applied the world over. It could be a real game changer, and it could end a lot of suffering. Samantha Walford wanted to be known, not just locally, and certainly not quietly. What she wanted was fame, the kind that now comes with ring lights and loyal subscribers. And in her corner of the internet, she'd already started carving that out. Her channel, Simply Manic, wasn't huge, but it did have traction. She vlogged about her life, her kids, and her dreams. She vented about exhaustion, about ambition, and about how hard it was to raise 5 children before the age of 25.
Hey guys, so I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos and a lot of different things, and I see a lot of women, I guess not women, teenagers, a lot of teenagers are wanting a baby and like actually talk about it on their YouTube channels and stuff. And I just wanted to post this video for all those women who think that having a child as a teen would be something smart to do. For starters, you do not have a life anymore after you have a baby. You become mom, you lose your identity. You're not a person anymore. It's really hard to retain being a person and being mom. Any sleep that you used to get is gone, because up until they turn about 4, they're going to wake up all hours of the night and come wake you up. They had a nightmare. They need a drink. They wet the bed. There's a million reasons.
Samantha had her first pair of twins when she was just 19, and then another set after getting together with a local tattoo artist, Ernest or Ernie Ibarra, in 2008. A 5th child followed a couple of years later. By the time she was 24, the two of them were married and juggling a household of 7. Ernie worked 2 jobs, manufacturing by day and Little Caesars by night. He was quiet, technical, a former bookworm, someone who loved computers and gaming. The couple weren't perfect though, they clashed often, especially once Samantha started prioritizing her YouTube channel. She believed the channel could grow into something bigger for her, acting, sponsorships, recognition, and she told friends that it was her way out. But to Ernie, it was just a distraction, a hobby taking her away from the kids and from reality. But their fights weren't just about the videos. Samantha alleged maltreatment. In 2014, she filed a complaint that led to Ernie's arrest and a protective order. However, his family insists that this wasn't true. They said Samantha wanted out and was just looking for a reason to make it happen. And for a while, things quietened down, the videos slowed, and the family seemed to stabilize. Until that is, February the 20th, 2015. That's the morning that Samantha called her mother, crying. She said that masked men had broken into the house. They'd tied her up. They'd taken Ernie. But when police arrived, they didn't find a chaotic crime scene. Instead, they found a suspicious one. Police arrived in the early morning hours of February the 20th. The front door had already been kicked in. Samantha was upstairs, tied at the wrists and ankles, gagged. However, inside the home, there was no real damage. No valuables were taken. There was no broken glass, overturned furniture, or frantic signs of escape. There was, however, red DNA on the wall and a lock of hair by the door, but everything else just felt wrong. Samantha told officers a terrifying story. She said that at around 1 a.m., masked intruders burst into the bedroom. She said they pulled the covers off the couple as they slept. One of the men held a sharp implement to her neck, and they dragged Ernie downstairs, beating him savagely. She said they forced him to look at her as they did it. They were using me like bait, she said through tears. She claimed they pistol whipped Ernie in the face, then forced her upstairs and tied her up, before disappearing into the night. After they left with Ernie, she said she scooted over to her phone and then used her face to dial her mother, not 911. She said that her mother was simply the first number in her call log. Detectives, though, weren't buying it. One of them asked, "Well, how did you dial your mother with your face?" She replied that that number just came up first. But that one detail started to unravel everything. Her injuries were inconsistent, her bindings weren't tight, and the intruders, supposedly violent and under the influence, had for some reason left her completely unharmed. By sunrise, Ernie's body had been found in the woods near Sand Crossing in Camp County. Someone had pulled the trigger once, whilst aimed at the back of his head. This was no longer a home invasion and a kidnapping. Now it was murder. And to make things worse for Samantha, her version of events was falling apart. At first, Samantha claimed to have no idea who the intruders were. She insisted they were strangers, just faceless men in black, high on something out of control. And then, suddenly, she remembered a name: Johnny Reb. She said that she'd met him at the hospital earlier that day. She said that he got angry when she told him about her husband's alleged maltreatment and that she'd let him borrow her car. That Johnny was actually Jonathan Sanford, a recently released felon. Police tracked him down at Titus County Regional Hospital, where he'd just welcomed a child into the world with his girlfriend. With him was Jose Antonio Pons, his brother-in-law. Both men were arrested for aggravated kidnapping. And strangely, neither of them denied being involved, but both of them had a different story about who was behind it. According to them, Samantha had planned everything. The initial idea, though, wasn't murder. She wanted to frame Ernie, to plant Crystal in his truck and then call the cops. But that plan fell apart, so they went for something far simpler to end his time on this earth. That night, Samantha, Sanford, Pons, and another man named Octavius Rhymes drove to buy the crystal. They used it in her car. She sat in the front with her kids in the back. This would be the same car that would later be used to abduct Ernie. The three men also indulged in crystal before the attack. As we know, they kicked in the door, pistol-whipped Ernie and then dragged him from his home and drove him out past the steel mill. It was there, in the cold woods, that Jose Pons pulled the trigger. Detectives would later find text messages that Samantha sent to Rhymes while police were searching for Ernie. One of them read, "Destroy his phone, shut that shit down, move." Those weren't the words of a victim, those were the words of a co-conspirator. Once the truth came out, there was no going back. Jonathan Sanford and Jose Pons pleaded guilty. They were each sentenced to 50 years in prison. Octavius Rhymes stood trial and received 93 years, 75 years for murder and 18 more for kidnapping. And Samantha Walford, whose tears and miraculous rescue had once looked like survival, now stood before a jury in Camp County, Texas, sentenced to 99 years to be served consecutively with a separate 50-year sentence for kidnapping. She was no longer a struggling mom on YouTube, no longer a woman looking for her big break. Now she was inmate number 02178523 at the Carroll County Medical Facility in Dickinson, Texas. And her channel, it is still there. She wanted to be famous, and now she is. The year was 1989. Television screens flickered with a now iconic advert. A boy in a Liverpool Football Club kit steps into the frame. His voice cuts through the scene. Accrington Stanley, who are they? For millions of viewers, it was just a catchy milk commercial. But for Kevin Spain, it was his first brush with fame. He was a young footballer with a promising future. His talent on the pitch mirrored the energy of the commercial. His co-star in that advert, Carl Rice, would go on to a successful acting career. He appeared in Coronation Street and Brassic. But Kevin Spain's life took a very different path. What should have been the start of something great, in fact ended in complete devastation. For a while though, Spain was a child with opportunity. He had a bright future ahead of him, one that could have led to football stardom or a career in entertainment. But the world of childhood innocence is fragile, and by his teenage years, cracks were already forming. By his early 20s, he wasn't a rising star anymore. He was a career criminal, an addict, and he was spiraling out of control. For the next 2 decades, in fact, his life would be defined by crime, addiction, and violence. And in 2022, Kevin Spain, once a child actor in a beloved commercial, would now be convicted of murder. Kevin did have many chances to turn his life around, but by the late 1990s he had already chosen his path. It was then that his name began to appear in court records. They were only small crimes at first, petty theft or minor substance offences, but they soon escalated. By 1999, he was fully entrenched in the world of crime. He became involved in the illicit substance supply chain, and he was no longer a footballer, no longer an actor. Instead, he was a street-level dealer, trapped in a cycle of addiction and violence. The years kept on passing. Nearly 100 offences over 40 court appearances. By his 30s, he had convictions for wounding, robbery and trafficking. He had no stable home, just a life of prison sentences and short-lived spurts of freedom. Each one of his attempts to break free from a life of crime failed, and by 2022, Kevin was a ghost of the boy who appeared in the advert. By now, he was a frequent visitor at a trap house in Anfield, Liverpool, a place where addicts came and went, where people used, sold and destroyed themselves away from prying eyes. Kevin wasn't the worst offender in that flat, but it turns out he may have been the most dangerous. On July the 27th, 2022, Kevin Spain arrived at the property. He was angry, agitated and desperate to get inside, but the door was locked. Inside, Leroy Venner, a homeless and frail 53-year-old man, refused to let him in. Leroy had been staying at the flat temporarily. He was sleeping on a camp bed in the lounge. He had no real power over the place, but that didn't matter to Kevin. All that mattered to him was that someone was denying him access. In reality, it was a small insult, but to him, it was enough. When the actual tenant, Mark Kelly, returned to the flat, he opened the door for Kevin before leaving once again. Now, Kevin was face to face with Leroy. There were no other witnesses. There was no escape. Only two men in a small, decrepit apartment. What happened next was quick, brutal, and one-sided. Kevin attacked without mercy. Punches, kicks, a relentless beating. Leroy Venner never stood a chance. When Kevin finally left the flat, he didn't look back. He did not call for help. He didn't check to see if Leroy was still breathing. Instead, he walked to his mother's house, he changed his clothes, and then vanished into the streets of Liverpool once again. For over an hour, Leroy Venner lay there. He was face up, but unconscious, and he was drowning in his own vital fluids. When paramedics finally arrived, it was already too late. He had suffered injuries so severe that the post-mortem compared them to a car crash or a fall from height. The boy from the Accrington Stanley milk advert was now a killer. That night, police found Spain on Edge Lane. When they arrested him, his response was almost casual. "That's a big charge. What do you mean, murder?" At first, he denied everything, and then he changed his story. He claimed that Leroy had taken swings at him and that he only hit back in self-defense. But the evidence told a different story altogether. Leroy Venner was too weak to be a threat, and Kevin Spain hadn't just defended himself. In reality, he had unleashed a savage attack. Witnesses placed him at the scene. The flat's tenant confirmed that Kevin had entered right before the attack took place. The post-mortem showed that no reasonable person could believe that this was just a scuffle. And then there was Kevin's history. A lifetime of violent offences of substance misuse and deception. In court, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours, and then they reached their verdict. Kevin Spain was guilty of murder. When sentencing him, Judge Brian Cummings Casey left no doubt about what he thought of Kevin. "Only you know exactly what happened in that flat, but you have shown yourself to be a shocking liar," he said. The court didn't buy his excuses, his claims of self-defense, or his attempts to justify the crime. This wasn't a moment of panic. It was rage, power, control, and probably an outlet for frustration at his life situation and just how wrong it had all gone. It must have hurt to see his co-star in the advert become a successful actor, while he himself was now about to face the full weight of the law. On February the 22nd, 2023, Kevin Spain stood in the dock at Liverpool Crown Court. His head was bowed. His life of crime had finally caught up with him. He was now a convicted murderer. The court fell silent as a judge delivered his sentence. Kevin would face life in prison, with a minimum of 18 years behind bars, before he could even be considered for parole. There was no last-minute plea for mercy. There were no visible signs of regret. Just a man who had lost everything, standing alone as the weight of his actions finally pushed down on his shoulders. The judge said, "I am sure there was no element of self-defense in anything you did to Leroy Venner. You attacked and killed a man whom you knew to be weak and in poor health." For years, people smiled at the nostalgia of his childhood role. Now, when they see that old milk commercial, they don't just hear the words, Accrington Stanley, who are they? They see the man who threw it all away, and a boy who would end up a killer, and no amount of nostalgia can ever change that. Edward Robert Mascari wasn't always internet famous. Long before YouTube, he was a TV personality. In the 1970s and early 80s, he hosted a children's show in Kansas City called 41 Treehouse Lane under the stage name Uncle Ed. He was also the campy vampire host of a late-night horror show, Uncle Ed's All Night Live. Kids seemed to love him and parents trusted him. He wore a cape, made corny jokes, and waved to the camera like your favourite weird uncle. But then in 1986, everything changed. Mascari was arrested for having inappropriate contact with a 14-year-old boy. He pleaded no contest to sexual battery in 1987. He even served 18 months in prison, followed by 10 years probation. His career as he knew it was over, and so he disappeared from the spotlight Until, that is, the internet unwittingly gave him a second chance. In 2006, well into his 70s, Ed resurfaced with a new name and a new platform, and that channel would be called Edarem, a YouTube channel built around strange, often delightful videos of himself dancing, lip-syncing, and being unapologetically odd. He sometimes wore sunglasses, he crooned along to songs, he acted out strange characters. He uploaded more than 130 videos, and somehow it clicked. People seemed to love it. He wasn't trying to be cool, he wasn't trying to follow trends. It just seemed like he was being his weird self. And that was enough to turn him into a cult figure in the early days of YouTube. By 2009, he had over 7 million views, which at that time was huge. He never hid his age, but he also never mentioned his past. To most viewers, Edarem was just a sweet old man having fun online. But in reality, his videos weren't just eccentric, they were actually completely illegal. What most of Uncle Ed's fans didn't know, or didn't want to believe, was that his ability to post videos at all was violating the law. When Edward Mascari was convicted in 1987, his probation terms were strict. After serving his time, he was placed on a register, and he was legally forbidden from owning a computer or using the internet without explicit permission. But by the time his YouTube channel blew up, Ed had already crossed that line. In 2007, after suffering harassment from neighbors in Florida, after, that is, they found out about his past, Ed then moved to South Carolina. Legally, he was required to notify local authorities. However, he didn't. He feared that if people knew who he really was, he'd be driven out once again. So instead, he chose to keep quiet. And then came the interview. Mascari appeared on a local TV segment, arguing that reformed offenders of his type should be allowed to live in peace. He also admitted, on air, that he hadn't registered his move with the authorities. Obviously, South Carolina police became aware of the clip, and within days they were at his door. They seized his computer and some alcohol, both of which were forbidden under local law for someone on the register. They found no illegal content, but it didn't matter. He'd violated his probation just by using the machine. A judge placed him on 5 more years of probation. This time, the conditions were crystal clear to Ed. He was to have no computer. He was to have no internet. There was to be no uploading of content. So, Ed came up with a workaround. He continued making videos, but he had his partner, Marion, upload them from her device. They believed that this loophole kept him within the law, but prosecutors wouldn't see it that way. In 2010, Mascari was arrested once again. At the sentencing hearing, he stood in front of Judge Mark Hill and said, "I'm frankly bewildered that I'm here. I don't think I've done anything wrong. I'm an entertainer. I've entertained all my life. These videos are done in fun, and I'm sure that most of the people see it that way." The court, however, didn't agree. Even though he wasn't accused of hurting anyone or of reoffending in any other way, the judge of course found him in violation of his probation. Mascari was now sentenced to 5 years in prison, and just like that, Edarem vanished from the internet. The backlash came quickly. Supporters flooded the comments on his channel. They called the sentence unjust, cruel, and unnecessary. They pointed out that the channel had brought joy to thousands, and that he'd harmed no one with his videos. Even one of his neighbors told reporters, "He's a helpful, warm, loving, kind, friendly man who's always there when you need him." But the legal system just doesn't work in feelings. So Ed was back in custody, proof that some crimes cannot just be forgotten or erased. The fact is, in his past, he did what he did. His partner and fiancée Marion continued to update his YouTube page whilst he was locked up. She kept fans informed. She tried to keep his presence alive. And then in 2011, Marion posted a somber update. Ed had been diagnosed with lung cancer. The doctor gave him 3 months to live. He was transferred to a medical facility at Lake Butler, but he was still incarcerated and still unable to return home. And then on January the 8th, 2012, Edward's time on this earth came to a close. He was 79 years old. That night, Marion uploaded one final video to the YouTube channel. She spoke, voice trembling, and told their followers, "Ed's gone. He died last night. I want people to remember him for the joy he gave, not for the mistake he made." Today, if you visit Ed Arem's YouTube channel, you'll still find him there. The robe, the sunglasses, the unmistakable grin of a man who believed he was born to be on camera. Of course, no new videos have been posted in years, but the comments haven't stopped. Under videos like Pretty Woman or All I Want for Christmas is My Two Front Teeth, new viewers still stumble in, curious and confused. Some are there to laugh, some to remember, and some to argue about whether a man like Ed should ever be forgotten. He believed that regardless of what he'd done, the videos he created made people happy. And by the numbers, millions of views, thousands of comments, entire fan pages, he wasn't wrong. Edward believed he should be forgiven and people should move on. But how do you feel about this one? Georgia Williams was born in Shropshire, England on September the 17th, 1995. From the time that she was born, she was a ray of sunshine and full of life. She was born into a very tight-knit family. Her father Stephen, who was a detective with the West Mercia Police, her mother Lynette, and an older sister, Scarlett. The family would do anything for one another. Georgia was a straight-A student and head girl at her school. She hadn't always had the easiest of times, struggling with school bullies in her early teens. But by the time she was 17, she really was thriving. She had a part-time job at a petrol station and a great group of friends. She was even a cadet in the Air Training Corps, hoping one day to become a Royal Air Force paramedic. With her big dreams, an infectious personality, and a smile that you couldn't ignore, Georgia was a force to be reckoned with. On May the 26th, 2013, Georgia was at a family barbecue. It was a warm evening and everyone was in high spirits. At around 7:30 p.m, Georgia left the family barbecue to meet up with some of her friends for a photo shoot. There was a group of them and they were trying to help out 23-year-old Jamie Reynolds. He was one of the full-time workers at the same petrol station as Georgia. Jamie had a keen interest in photography and wanted to pursue it as a career, a big dream from simply working at a petrol station. Georgia and the rest of their friends encouraged him, and they offered to help him in any way that they could. And on this particular evening, he took the group up on their offer to model for some photos. Just a little something he could use in his portfolio. Jamie's parents' house was only a few minutes away on foot, so after letting her family know she would be back later, she headed off down the street. Her family continued with their barbecue, enjoying another UK summer. A few hours went by with no word from Georgia, so her mother Lynette sent a text message asking how everything was going and when they should expect her back home. She received a text back saying that although the photo shoot was done, she was going to hang out with her friends for a while longer, and that she didn't know when she would be coming back home. She put her usual 3 kisses at the end of the message. On Monday morning, Mother Lynette woke up at 6 a.m. She noticed that Georgia's bed had not been slept in. Lynette started to get concerned and sent another text to her phone asking where she was at. She finally got a response a few hours later. She said that she lost track of time and stayed over at her friend's place, but she forgot to message her to let her know. At the end of the message, she said, "My battery is dying too." Lynette knew that this wasn't right. Georgia would never want to cause any worry to anyone, and she never failed to let anyone know where she was. That morning, Georgia was supposed to go to a music festival and then take a driving lesson. If she wasn't home for these things, then something had to be wrong. It got to Tuesday morning and there was still no word from Georgia. Her parents now really started to panic. They started calling her friends to see if anyone had seen or heard from her, but all of them said no. Her parents went straight to the police to make a missing persons report. Her parents told the police that she had spent the evening at Jamie Reynolds' family home with their friends. They didn't know too much about him, other than the fact that he seemed to be a quiet and polite boy. They knew that Jamie had started to develop a liking for Georgia, something that he didn't hide. And they also knew that Georgia did not share the same feelings towards him. She rejected his advances. But she was more than happy to help him with his dream of being a photographer. Georgia was just the type of person who would be anyone's friend. She wanted to make sure that everyone felt included. Perhaps this is due to her history of bullying. But when the police did a background check on Jamie, what they found was disturbing. In 2008, when he was 17 years old, he had attempted to strangle a 16-year-old girl, luring her under false pretenses of helping her with a school project. He somehow then got off with only a warning, and the youth offending team at Mental Health Services made visits to assess the situation further. His parents told the team that he had been obsessed with violent adult content and films involving asphyxiation. He also had disturbing drawings of schoolgirls in uniforms with nooses around their necks. After the mental health team's visit, they determined that he was a significant risk and relayed this information to the police. Unfortunately though, the police did not take any further action. They believed the case had been suitably resolved. The police got straight to searching for Jamie, who wasn't at home. But with the help of CCTV and number plate recognition, Jamie and his van were seen at a cheap hotel almost 300 miles away in Glasgow, Scotland. But there was no sign of Georgia Williams. Shropshire police contacted the police in Scotland, and he was found and taken in for questioning. He claimed to know nothing about Georgia's whereabouts. The police were not satisfied and arrested him on suspicion of kidnap, bringing him back to Shropshire for further questioning. But Jamie continued to deny all allegations. The detectives headed back towards Georgia's last known location, Jamie's house. They conducted a thorough and in-depth search, looking for any signs of her whereabouts. No one could have predicted what they would find. They discovered 16,800 images and 72 videos of extreme adult material on his computer. But given his background, this was hardly surprising. After previously being let off with a warning, we can surmise that he felt like he had free rein to do this. But what they came across next was horrifying, even to the most experienced of investigators. They found a camera in the house, its memory card wiped clean. But fortunately, whoever had wiped the data had not done a good job. Investigators were able to recover the data, and this data told the full story. A grainy video clip showed a happy and bubbly Georgia, grinning at the camera with a noose around her neck. This was on the landing of Jamie's house whilst he took pictures. But seconds later, Jamie Reynolds was throttling Georgia with that same rope. The pictures and video showed that Georgia had been forced on top of a box. He had built a terrifying hanging mechanism mounted in the loft hatch of his parents' semi-detached home. He had convinced Georgia to willingly put the noose around her neck. And then Jamie kicked the box right from underneath her. And there Georgia was suspended by the neck. She had been photographed and videoed like this all over his house. Then, after he was done, he had violated her body. The detectives found a script, 5 months worth of work he'd put into a twisted tale, a tale where he described ending Georgia in this very manner. The officers rearrested Jamie and charged him with the murder of Georgia Williams. Even after her death, he continued to play twisted games. He refused to tell investigators where her body was hidden. Instead, the police had to use a timeline of Jamie's movements, covering the days after Georgia's disappearance. The day after Georgia went missing, CCTV footage showed Jamie filling up his van with fuel. In the back of the van was Georgia's body. He then drove 60 miles to Wrexham, where he had stopped to watch a film in a cinema. The film was The Fast and the Furious. With Jamie in custody, the police had gone to the public for help. Police say they need information to fill a gap of about 5.5 hours in Cheshire heading north. Many people did come forward saying that they, in fact, did see Jamie and that they had helped him at the side of the road when his van got stuck. From here, the police searched and searched. 5 days after she had gone missing, they found the unclothed remains of Georgia Williams. She was barely hidden, abandoned in a wooded area near Wrexham. For her family, this wasn't really closure. It was merely devastating.
Friends of Georgia expressed the feelings of many in this Shropshire community who've been stunned at this awful turn of events.
It's just complete shock that it's happened to one of our friends, that someone who wouldn't even harm a fly. It's just strange and weird that it's happened.
She's a lovely person to be around. Like she'd walk into a room and the room would brighten with a smile.
She's just the most intelligent person I knew. And clever, pretty, just lovely in every way.
On December 2nd, 2013, Jamie Reynolds appeared at the Stafford Crown Court. Before he entered the courtroom, he was laughing and joking, showing not 1 ounce of remorse for what he had done. As he entered the room, his demeanour changed to meek and mild. Jamie Reynolds then pleaded guilty to murder. This was a relief to the family of Georgia. They would not have to endure the harrowing pictures showing their daughter's final moments as part of a jury trial. In his final remarks, the judge laid bare the case in front of him. Jamie had written storylines, over 40 of them, where the predominant theme was killing a young woman and then violating her body. Many of the victims in these stories were real girls that he knew and named, girls including Georgia. He'd written of her entrapment, her untimely death, and he carried it out to a T on that fateful evening. After describing her hanging from the rope, he had written, "I can't wait to see you dance with me. I like my girls dead." He lured her with the pretense of a photo shoot that merely mimicked hanging. After placing a noose around her neck and securing her to a contraption created in a loft hatch, he suddenly pulled the noose tight and kicked away the box on which she had been standing. Within minutes, he was taking photographs of her body before violating her repeatedly. He then sent a text message to her mother from her phone in an elaborate deceit. This was to give the impression that she had left his home safely. He then used his stepfather's van to load her body, her clothes and her jewellery, and drove her to a remote area in North Wales where he disposed of the body. And then he bought a new watch, went to the cinema, and checked into a hotel for the night. He thought he'd gotten away with it, but he clearly hadn't. Psychiatrists who examined the depraved 23-year-old had said if he had not been caught, he would progress to become a serial killer. In fact, in the lead up to the very weekend when Georgia was killed, Jamie sent messages to 16 other young women, inviting them over for a photographic shoot involving simulating hanging. Like he told Georgia, he said it was for his portfolio. 2 or 3 of them showed interest and he made plans with them for later on that week. That was if for some reason things didn't go according to plan with Georgia. So this wasn't a one-off. This was the work of a sick and twisted sadistic killer. On December the 19th, he was given the hardest sentence possible under British criminal law. A full life order, meaning he will never get out of prison. He became one of the youngest people in British criminal history to receive this kind of sentence. Jamie had appealed this sentence, but the Court of Appeal said there's no possible way a whole life order could be argued against, and that his sentence was just. With this, his appeal was quickly denied. He will never see freedom again. Lindy Williams painted herself as a survivor. In 2007, she sat down with Woman's Day magazine and shared a harrowing story, one that sounded like it came straight from a crime novel or one of my videos. She claimed she had been kidnapped and tortured in the Australian bush by a crazed stalker. She spoke of a masked attacker who carved symbols into her skin. She claimed he stuffed her mouth with dirt and rocks to silence her screams, and that she was left there for dead, bleeding in the dirt. Her story spread and people sympathised with her. She was the woman who survived. But in reality, all of this was a lie. A close friend later testified that Lindy had just made it all up. She had even carved the symbols into her own skin to make the story more convincing. She created a completely fake villain, turning herself into a tragic hero. And for years, she lived under that identity. But what the world didn't know was that this wouldn't be her last deception, because just 6 years later, she would be at the centre of something far worse, a crime so gruesome that even hardened detectives struggled to comprehend it. And this time, the lies would not save her. September the 19th, 2013, a motorist was driving down Cedar Pocket Road, a rural stretch near Gympie, Queensland, when they saw something smouldering by the roadside. It looked like a burnt-out animal carcass until they got closer. This wasn't an animal. It was a human torso, head and limbs missing, and it was partially incinerated. Police arrived at the gruesome scene, but their first challenge was figuring out who the victim was. After all, the head was missing, and the arms and lower body were gone too. The fire had also destroyed key evidence, so whoever did this didn't want him to be found. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, but it still took them 10 months to confirm the victim's identity. The remains belonged to 66-year-old George Gerbic. But while his family mourned his loss, they had one pressing question. Why, over the last 10 months, were they still receiving emails from a dead man? For those 10 months, no one knew that George was dead. Not his family, not his friends, not even his son, Simon. And this is because someone was still sending messages from his email account. There was a birthday message for his son in January, and a Christmas greeting sent just weeks before his body was found. There was updates about his supposed vacations in Asia and Europe, and to those who knew him, it seemed like George was simply travelling. But he wasn't. In fact, he hadn't been alive since September. When investigators dug deeper, they realised something chilling. Lindy Williams, his longtime partner, was in fact the person that had been sending those emails. It seems that she had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it seem like George was still alive. She told his friends he was taking some time off to de-stress. She used his phone and email to respond to loved ones, and she even told his son that George was sick in bed when he wasn't even there. He wasn't even alive. And for nearly a year, her plan worked. But there was one problem. When police finally identified the torso, they came knocking on Lindy's door, and what they found made her web of lies collapse instantly. At first, Lindy played the role of grieving girlfriend. She insisted that she had nothing to do with George's demise. But then her story began to shift. At first she claimed that George attacked her with a steak knife, and she fought back with a bar stool. He then slipped, hit his head, and that is when his life came to an end. But police weren't convinced by this story. When they searched Lindy's home, they found evidence that shattered her version of events. DNA was all over the bathroom. It was revealed using luminol, even though the area had been heavily cleaned with bleach. There was a receipt from Bunnings, which is like Home Depot or B&Q, showing she had bought an electric saw shortly before George's death. That was a red flag, to say the least. There was also, strangely, missing floorboards. This suggested an attempt to destroy evidence. Then came the biggest twist of all. Lindy admitted that she left, and when she came home days later, George's body had already been dismembered. She said that she hadn't done it, but someone else had. She implied that a mysterious friend had helped clean up the crime. However, usefully, she refused to name them. No one believed her story, however, and when investigators confronted her with evidence, her story would change once again.
And I've got photos of this too, and I don't know if the doctor does, but I have. And I've got his hand marks on my arm.
Now she admitted that she had cut up George's body, but she insisted it was only to hide the accident. Police had now heard enough. They arrested Lindy Williams, and they charged her with murder. Lindy stood before the court, no longer a grieving girlfriend. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't even a woman covering up a tragic accident. Now she was seen as simply a calculating killer, and it seems a jury saw right through her lies. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of what really happened to George Gerbic. They argued that Lindy had killed George inside their home, but how? That remains a mystery. She had bought an electric saw and then used it to cut him up. She wrapped his torso in plastic, securing it with rope. She then drove 80 kilometers to Gympie, dumped his body by the road, and set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Then she spent the next 10 months pretending he was alive, sending the fake emails, lying to his family, and continuing with her own life as if nothing had happened. This didn't appear to be a panicked woman that had simply made a mistake. Instead, this was cold, calculated deception. The jury took less than a day to reach their verdict. Lindy was guilty of murder. Justice Peter Flanagan didn't hold back in his sentencing. The act of cutting up George Gerbic with a saw is, on any view, horrific. This surely must be one of the worst cases of interference with a human body. He condemned Lindy's cruel cover-up, saying, "You lied to his parents. You lied to his son. You denied them the closure of burying him." Because of Lindy's actions, George's family will likely never be able to lay his full body to rest. His head, hands and lower body were never found. Lindy Williams was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years before parole. She will be 76 years old before she's even considered for release. And for a woman who spent her entire life crafting false stories, the one thing she can never now escape is the truth. Just a quick one. For some reason, my videos are normally seen by just 1 to 2% of my subscribers. I actually don't know why. Regardless of the reasons, it's making it extremely challenging to keep this show on the road. And I promise I don't like to do this. It makes me feel like Oliver Twist or something. But please do consider becoming a channel member. There are currently 343 of you, and I'm aiming for the crazy goal of 1,000 by the end of 2026. You get things like early access to videos, our behind the scenes podcast, and of course my eternal gratitude. Thank you, and I love you all. Now, back to the video. Layla Alavi was 26 years old. She was an apprentice hairdresser with dreams of a better life. She had fled an horrific marriage, leaving behind the man who had controlled her every move. But Mokhtar Hosseini Amrai wasn't willing to let her go. For months on end, he had stalked her. He had threatened her. He promised her that if he couldn't have her, no one would. Layla did everything right. She took out an apprehended violence order, or AVO. She moved to a new home. She changed her phone number, but it was never enough because Mokhtar didn't see her as a person. He saw her as his possession. In October 2014, Mokhtar threatened to kill her for the very first time. She reported him. She took legal action, and it seemed like the ordeal may be over. But then on January the 16th, 2015, he called her once again. And it wasn't a call he made out of kindness. He wasn't feeling nostalgic, and he wasn't just checking in to make sure she was doing okay in her new life. Instead, he uttered the words, "I will kill you." The threat understandably sent Layla into a panic. She changed her phone number again that night, hoping it would finally cut him off for good. But Mokhtar was already planning his next move. He armed himself with a pair of scissors, and the next morning, he went out looking for her. Now January the 17th, it was a normal morning at the Oban shopping centre. Layla had just started her shift at the hair salon. She had no idea that her killer was already there, watching, waiting. And then her phone rang. It was him. Maybe she was scared, or maybe she just panicked. But when Mokhtar asked her to meet him in the underground parking lot, she agreed. Maybe she thought she could talk him down. Maybe she was just tired of running. By this point, she had already approached 12 different organisations in order to gain protection or some kind of help in her situation. That is, as well as the restraining order. So she really must have been just completely exhausted. But the moment that Layla stepped into her own car, she was trapped. The attack was immediate. Layla never stood a chance. Mokhtar pulled out the scissors and started lashing out. 56 times contact was made with her body, her head, her neck, her torso. This was a frenzied rage, the kind meant to destroy. Layla did fight back. She tried to shield herself, but Mokhtar was too strong and too enraged. The car's interior was covered in red spatter, and when it was over, when she stopped moving, he simply got out and he walked away. Layla's body lay there, alone and lifeless. This was all because she tried to leave, and because she wanted to be happy, but because in his mind she belonged to him and she had broken the rules, she must pay. After Layla didn't return to work, a colleague came looking for her. When she arrived at Layla's car, she saw her, covered by a blanket, no longer alive. The police were called. Mokhtar didn't particularly try to run or hide, because in his mind he had done nothing wrong. When police arrived, they found him hours later at a house in Guildford West. He was calm and detached. The officers placed him under arrest, charging him with murder and violating the AVO. When I asked him why he had hurt his estranged wife 56 times, he answered without hesitation. She did not obey the rule of marriage. We were married and she broke the contract. In his mind, Layla wasn't a person with her own choices. She was his wife, and that meant she was his to control. If she didn't obey, if she dared to leave him, he believed that she had to be punished. It seems he felt no remorse and no guilt. When he was asked where he had jabbed her, he spoke as if he were recalling something casual, in her heart and her neck. As if that explained everything, as if it justified her murder. The case against Mokhtar was overwhelming. He had already admitted to the murder. The security footage showed him arriving at a shopping centre that morning. His own words to the police painted the picture of a man who saw murder as his right, and the autopsy confirmed the sheer brutality of his attack. The prosecution described it as a frenzied, ferocious attack, planned with significant forethought. They laid out the months of threats, the way Layla had tried to escape him, the AVO, the constant harassment, the final phone call. Mokhtar's defense, though, tried to argue that he had been in a state of mental distress, that the breakdown of the relationship and his unstable housing situation had caused him to act without thinking. They also said that he had been under the influence of substances. The jury, however, they weren't convinced. The truth here was undeniable. Mokhtar had planned this. He had called her, lured her, and then butchered her. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was filled with grief and fury. Layla's sisters, Marjan and Mitra, sat in the gallery, clutching each other for support. Justice Robert Holmes' voice was firm as he delivered the sentence. Life in prison. This meant a maximum of 21 years, with a minimum of 15 years and 9 months, before Mokhtar would even be considered for parole. The judge condemned the man's mindset. He called it breathtakingly arrogant and misogynistic. He pointed out how Mokhtar hadn't been deterred by the apprehended violence order, how he hadn't simply snapped in a fit of passion. His intent to kill had been clear that morning. He relayed how Layla's final moments must have been filled with terror. The sisters sat and wept in silence, but when it was their turn to speak, Marjan's words cut through the courtroom. She said, "The first week was like the end of the world. Each night I would have nightmares. How could anyone kill her? She was such a loving, kind person." And then, the question that will never have an answer: why didn't she receive the protection that she needed? Sister Mitra spoke next, her voice shaking with a mix of sorrow and rage. "My sister and I left Iran for a better life, away from violence. Layla was everything to me. She was the only family I had for many years. I was worried about her relationship with this man for years. After Layla was murdered, there was no more colour in my life. My world turned black. 15 years and 9 months. That's how long this killer must serve before he can even apply for release. But for Layla's family, there is no parole from grief, no second chance, and no sentence will ever bring back the vibrant young woman who just wanted to live her own life. She just wanted to be happy." This is the true story of Alexis Sharkey, an incredibly driven, popular and intelligent young influencer. Someone that had a life full of money, beaches and good times ahead of her. So when she mysteriously stopped replying to messages and witness stories weren't quite adding up, where would her friends, family and the police even begin to look? What had become of Alexis? Alexis Robinault was born in Warren, Pennsylvania on January the 25th, 1994. Even as a child, she could light up a room with her smile. When she laughed, she had a way of making everyone feel like they were in on the joke. Despite growing up in a small town, everyone knew that Alexis was always destined for bigger things. She wanted to travel, see the world, and experience new things. She always talked about getting out of that small town. After graduating from high school, Alexis went on to study biology and psychology at the University of Pittsburgh. She was considering going to medical school, but she was apprehensive. By going to medical school, starting her career and planting her roots in one area, she worried she could be settling down for life. After graduating, she decided to spend the next few years checking things off of her bucket list. She carefully curated her Instagram feed to showcase her adventures. She gained a lot of attention and fell into becoming an influencer. She moved to Texas and worked as a bartender at Twin Peaks. This was to support herself while she traveled and explored new places. Here she met her future husband, Tom Sharkey. 23 years her senior, the two had immediate chemistry. Tom worked as a consultant in the oil field, and he would often travel around the country for work, but whenever he was in Odessa, he would stop into the Twin Peaks to see Alexis. He seemed like a nice guy and the two hit it off. Alexis and Tom got married in 2019 and eventually moved to Houston, Texas. Tom had friends in the area, but Alexis hardly knew anyone. She worked from home as an influencer, so she downloaded Bumble as a way to meet new friends. Through the app, she met Tanya Ricardo and they hit it off immediately. Tanya introduced Alexis to her group of friends, and within just a couple of weeks, Alexis had formed another close-knit circle of friends. She took her friendship seriously and always made it a point to spend time with people outside of her relationships. Thanksgiving 2020 was no different. Alexis spent Thanksgiving with Tanya and her family away from Tom. They played board games and ate all day with everyone in high spirits. Then at around midnight, another friend picked up Alexis and they went out to a bar. They partied the night or the morning away until 3 a.m. Alexis then returned to Tanya's house to pick up her car and drive back to her apartment. The next day was Black Friday, and as an influencer, Alexis was in for a busy day. It was one of the biggest sales days of the year, and therefore it was a big money-making opportunity for her. When Alexis hadn't answered Tanya's calls that morning, that's what she put it down to. She thought she was busy creating content and making sales, but by midday her social media was still dark, with her not posting to her feed or story at all. This wasn't like her on a normal day, let alone on one of the busiest days of the year. She also wasn't responding to messages in the group chat. This wasn't like Alexis at all. Her life was social media, so her phone was her life. Her friends were starting to worry, but these worries were appeased when Alexis texted the group chat at 5:30 p.m. She ignored the previous messages that had been sent all day and asked if anyone wanted to go out that night. It was the holiday, so no one could really meet up, but the group agreed to hang out the next day and have a chilled girls' night in. Little did they know that this text would be the last time they would hear from Alexis. When Alexis stopped responding to their messages, her friends immediately began to worry, and so too did Tom, Alexis' husband. Tom sent a text message to one of Alexis's friend's boyfriends, a man named John. He asked him if he had heard from her. Tom claimed that he and Alexis had gotten into a big argument. He said it resulted in Alexis hopping over the patio fence, jumping into a waiting car, and driving off with the occupants. John immediately called Tom, but something felt off. When explaining what had happened, Tom went over everything he had done that day, detailing things that didn't really matter instead of focusing on finding Alexis. The call lasted for 45 minutes, and immediately after, John told his girlfriend that something was very wrong. Tom went on to call other friends of Alexis, telling them different stories about what had happened that night. To some, he claimed that Alexis and he didn't get into a fight. Rather, she had just got mad at him and stormed off out of the house barefoot. She then jumped into a small black car and drove off. But when asked how she would go off into the middle of the night without shoes, he then said it was possible that she was wearing shoes, but he just didn't notice. He claimed that Alexis had also left without her phone, but when he spoke to other people, he told them that he had tracked her using the Find My Phone application. By the next morning, he had called and spoken with multiple people, including Alexis's mum. He told very differing stories about what had happened. As Alexis's friends got up, they became increasingly worried. Tanya went over to Tom and Alexis' apartment, but found that no one was there. Together with Alexis' mum, she filed a police report. Her friends immediately jumped into action, creating posters, hashtags, and Instagram posts, spreading awareness about Alexis being missing. On November the 28th, at around 8:30 a.m, something caught the eye of a sanitation worker employed by the city. It looked like a mannequin abandoned at the side of the road, but something didn't sit right with him. He phoned his boss for help, saying that he wasn't sure what he was looking at. In reality, he was looking at the body of Alexis Sharkey. Her body was completely clean, as if she'd been ended coming out of the shower or bath, and she was placed on the side of the road, posed in a degrading manner. Whoever took the life of Alexis wanted to treat her like garbage, like an object. They removed all clothes and left her in a very public road, just 3 miles from her apartment. She was there to be seen by as many people as possible, maybe people that she knew. This was no accident. This was personal. Despite the fact that her body had no visible injuries, her family and friends were certain that someone had done this to her. It was just a feeling, but it was correct. On January the 19th, 2021, over a month since Alexis passed, it was revealed that an autopsy ruled Alexis' cause of death was strangulation. Her passing was ruled as a homicide. It was also publicised that Tom was listed as Alexis' next of kin. He was the only person who her body could be released to, but he had left her body in the morgue for 2 months and never bothered to claim it. Just a note from me, I really hate this. Leaving someone alone, cold and dark, even though it's just the physical form and not necessarily the person, it just really hits me. These aren't nice places. After Alexis was found, Tom had agreed with her mother that they should have a memorial service in Pennsylvania with her family. He said he would get the body and pay for a burial. That is, until he stopped speaking to the family, full stop. Tom claimed that he felt disrespected by them. In response, he flat out refused to pick up Alexis's remains. This left the family powerless and unable to lay their beloved Alexis to rest. As the police delved deeper into Alexis and Tom's relationship, alarm bells began to ring. The relationship wasn't as picture perfect as it first appeared. Friends told the police that after a year of marriage, Alexis had wanted to get a divorce. She opened up about how Tom had been maltreating her, how he would throttle her until she passed out whenever they fought. She claimed that this had happened multiple times over the years, and despite Tom's promises to stop, the maltreatment had only gotten worse. Just a note from me, these people will never stop and they will never change. Almost without fail, their behaviour will get worse and worse and more extreme until we reach a situation like this. Be careful, make a plan, and get out. Alexis also showed her friends the messages that Tom had been sending her while she was on a trip. In these messages, he had called her a derogatory term. He accused her of having affairs with other men and expressed his general hatred towards her. It was also revealed that Alexis had begun to flirt and talk with another man outside of their relationship. According to friends, Alexis had met this man whilst on a trip to Mexico. She wasn't planning on it, but they had simply hit it off. She told him that she was in the middle of a divorce. She didn't want to start anything before her marriage was ended. But he had been a friend who she went to bars with on Thanksgiving. Could this have been the catalyst for the events that led to her untimely end? Tom gave multiple interviews stating that Alexis wasn't the nice, happy person that people believed, but instead she was dealing with a lot of personal demons. He claimed that she was stressed 24/7 and hated her life. He said that he was the only person that she could be herself around. Tom said that her friends and family didn't know the real Alexis, claiming that she had carefully crafted the perfect version of herself in front of others. Tom had been asked to give a sample of his DNA to the detectives on the case in order to rule him out. He agreed that he would give a small sample at a time, but before he did, he said he needed to talk to his lawyer. Instead, he moved to Georgia. The behaviour of an innocent man, obviously. Eventually, the police were able to track him down and arrange for them to meet, only for Tom to once again leave the state. He came up with a very bizarre story later on why he essentially disappeared, and then a short time after that incident, he relocated again to Florida. Progress on the case was slow as the police continued to pursue Tom. That was until September the 29th, 2021, when Houston police got an arrest warrant signed. They finally had enough to bring him in for the murder of his wife. Because of the high-profile nature of the case, and because he had been evasive with the police throughout, they went very quietly about obtaining the arrest warrant. After determining that he was living in Florida with his daughter, they prepared to take him in. However, things wouldn't go as planned. Not by a long shot. The task force of US Marshals located Tom at the residence of his daughter in Fort Myers. They were able to make contact and establish that he was inside the residence. But when they announced their arrival, things took a turn. Tom wasn't ready to face the consequences of his actions. When he learned that law enforcement was there for him, he ran upstairs. Before police could do anything at all, he took his own life using a firearm. He passed on the scene.
I would like to emphasize that this has been a very tragic series of events for both families, the Robanals and the Sharkeys. They've been through hell, essentially, with the attention of the public on this case. I want to put out there that no one else is suspected of any involvement in the case, and no one else is under investigation in the case. We have clear evidence that Mr. Sharkey acted alone.
Because he ended himself before speaking to police, we'll never know the events that led to Alexis's passing. This case will likely be closed now that Tom Sharkey, the only suspect, is dead. Alexis deserved so much more out of life, and Tom died as a coward, refusing to accept any responsibility. Mother Stacey has a different view. Loss of life is never good, but I do feel like, in a way, he did serve himself justice. If I were to write a romantic tragedy, I would consider conjuring up an image of a beautiful young woman, someone who was deeply in love and looking forward to marrying the man of her dreams, living happily together with their children, and reaching an old age together surrounded by the family that they had made. The young woman would be writing a love letter to her fiancé, sharing her rose-tinted vision. But before she could finish the love letter, a monster would enter the scene and strike her down. The pen would fall to the floor, her dreams, her future, her love, all snuffed out in an instant. This is the tragic story of Carrie Nelson. Carrie Nelson was born on the 13th of December 1980 to father Stan and mother Nan. She had a younger sister named Katie. They sometimes fought, but always made up. It's just what siblings do. Carrie was described by people that knew her as well-liked and hard-working. Carrie's father, Stan, said about her, "Carrie was a sweet girl. She was kind and loving and sensitive. She was probably too sensitive. She wore her heart on her sleeve, as they say. She was loyal to her friends and committed to her family and fiancé. I always knew she loved me, no matter what." In 1999, Carrie graduated from Laverne High School in Laverne, Minnesota. She had been attending college in South Dakota. Carrie started working at the Blue Mound State Park in Rock County, southwest Minnesota. She had worked at the park for the last 2 summers. Her intention was to soon go back to college and become a medical technician. She was there simply as a seasonal worker for the second summer. This was only planned to be a short chapter of her life before returning back to college. At Blue Mound State Park, there was a campground, climbing areas, an interpretive centre, which is basically a museum, and a contact station. The contact station is where Carrie was working. There she had to offer vehicle and camping permits to campers as well as to greet park visitors. Carrie loved her job there since it allowed her to be active. It also allowed her to interact with a wide variety of individuals from all kinds of backgrounds. One individual that she worked with, however, had a background that brought feelings of unease. A co-worker named Stephen was someone that concerned Carrie. She believed he could have been stalking her. Carrie told her friends that he just wouldn't leave her alone. Carrie was also aware that Stephen was a user of illegal substances, and he was even known to deal these substances whilst working at the park. The behaviour felt serious enough that Carrie was considering reporting him to the police. By 2001, Carrie had a fiancé, a man named Mike Kellen. This was a relationship that both Mike and Carrie saw growing into something that would last a lifetime. Mike said that they planned to get married, have babies, and have a life, adding, "She was everything I ever wanted." Now Sunday, May the 20th, 2001, Carrie was 20 years old. She was working the 8 AM to 3 PM shift. She worked alongside new co-worker Rebecca White that day. Rebecca was actually the daughter of Richard White, who was the manager of Blue Mound State Park. Richard, however, wasn't working that day. He instead spent the day at home with his wife, at a home that was located within the grounds of the park. It was only Rebecca's second day, so Carrie was showing her the ropes. Rebecca was going to be working mainly in the museum, so after Carrie taught her what she needed to do, at around 12:45 PM, Rebecca left the contact station and drove to the museum in the park's vehicle. This meant that Carrie was now by herself in the office. It was raining that day, and whilst working, Rebecca had gotten wet. So at around 2 PM, she left her post at the museum and went back to her parents' house to change. This didn't take long as the house was also on the park grounds. A little after 2:30 PM, Rebecca returned to the contact station. She entered through the back door and discovered Carrie laying on the ground. Carrie's ear was covered in blood. At first glance, this didn't look like an accident. Carrie had been attacked. Rebecca hurried out the back door and back to her house to inform her parents that something had happened to Carrie. At the same moment she left out the back door, she heard someone entering the contact station through the front entrance. Rebecca had a gut feeling that this was probably the same person that had attacked Carrie, so she quickly left without looking back. Rebecca arrived home and grabbed Father Richard, who was napping on the couch. Rhonda, Rebecca's mother, dialed 911 at 2:45 p.m. Richard hurried over to the contact station. When he reached down to check Carrie's pulse, he found that she had already passed away. Richard also dialed 911, locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and pulled down the blinds.
I've got a dead parks worker on the floor. A dead what? I've got a dead parks worker on the floor of the office.
That day, 3 911 calls were made about the incident. Rhonda made the first, Richard made the second, and a park visitor made the third. The person who entered through the front entrance of the contact station as Rebecca was leaving was actually a park visitor who wanted to buy a permit. The female visitor entered the room and noticed that the fax machine receiver was hanging from its cable, which struck her as suspicious. As she walked over nearer to the counter, she could then see Carrie laying on the floor. She fled the station and dialed 911. At this time, Mike, Carrie's boyfriend, was in Wyndham for a wake. Wyndham was around 6 hours away from the Blue Mount State Park. He tried calling her at around 3:30 p.m. This was the time that Carrie should have finished working, a great time for them to catch up. He first tried calling her cell phone and got no answer. He then tried calling Carrie's office number, still no answer. Mike was tragically unaware that Carrie's life was ended whilst writing a love letter addressed to him. A few minutes after the 911 calls were made, police showed up at the park. There were 2 grey bank bags missing from the safe. The bags contained $1,000 in each, meaning a total of $2,000 was missing. Paper was spread over the contact station's back area. The fax machine receiver was dangling from its cord as seen by the witness, giving the impression that a struggle had taken place there. The office's floor, ceiling and counter all had blood on them. Broken shards of plastic and a damaged chair armrest were visible in the office. Next to Carrie, a fragment of rock with blue mounds engraved on it was lying on the ground. Police were unable to locate the rest of the rock, which was normally kept at the office as an ornament. Next to Carrie's body was a damaged Field Ranger wristwatch, along with a packet of Doral Light 100 cigarettes. Co-worker Stephen was someone that raised a high level of suspicion immediately. Police marked him as a person of interest. A possible motive for the attack could have been some kind of crime of passion. After all, Carrie believed he was stalking her. It even could have been that he had discovered Carrie was going to report him to the police, and this was a way of silencing her to ensure he remained out of the gaze of the police.
My beautiful little girl will never come running into my arms again saying, "I love you, Daddy." Whoever did this must be caught so that they can never do it again.
All traceable park visitors were contacted by police, which brought forward quite a few witnesses. Carrie was spotted outside the contact station at 1:30 p.m. This was according to a couple who were camped out in the park. At 1:52 p.m, another camper observed Carrie in the contact station as they entered to buy a permit from her. The window when this attack could have happened was getting smaller. In what seems like something from a movie, a love letter written by Carrie helped the investigation to progress. Carrie had been writing the letter to her fiancé. However, the letter wasn't finished. It cut off partway through. On it, she had written the time and date, 20th of May, 2 p.m. This love letter and the information that could be deduced from it led the police to believe that the assault took place approximately between 2 and 2:30 p.m. Just before 2:30 p.m, an Oldsmobile or Monte Carlo with 2 doors and a brown vinyl top drove past the campsite as seen by a couple staying there. They said it was driving well above the speed limit. something that stood out to them. The police investigation continued to progress with Carrie's autopsy. Her cause of death was revealed to be blunt force trauma with multiple traumatic injuries to the brain. At least 5 blows to the head were recorded in Carrie's case, but the pathologist thought there may have been more. The pathologist found that Carrie's head injuries were caused by severe blows that were delivered with a lot of power. Carrie's death was declared a homicide. Most of the engraved rock that was used to strike Carrie was missing. It was, however, later located in a creek. The pathologist concluded that it was most likely that this rock caused Carrie's head injuries. DNA samples were taken by police from the contact station. Carrie's DNA was found in the bloodstains and blood spatter in the room. Carrie's co-worker Stephen was still under investigation and was very much a suspect in her passing. His alleged history of stalking Carrie left fingers pointed in his direction. Under further investigation, it became clear that he had no alibi for the time that Carrie was believed to have passed. Police took fingerprints and DNA samples to further the investigation. The shattered wristwatch that was discovered close to Carrie's body included 5 DNA mixtures. A DNA mixture are profiles made up of the DNA of 3 or more different people. There was, however, no evidence that the watch belonged to Stephen, and his DNA did not match any profiles found at the scene. In fact, there were no matching results in the entire Minnesota forensic database. Other DNA sample databases from surrounding states were searched for a profile that matched the unidentified DNA samples from the wristwatch. These too came back with no positive results. Stephen was now ruled out of the investigation, leaving the police stunned and scrambling for new suspects. However, with no new information or leads, the investigation into Carrie's passing ground to a halt. The case was closed as a result. As DNA analysis methods advanced over the years, a second look at the DNA discovered on the wristwatch was conducted. In the early 2000s, DNA testing became quicker, more accurate, and required a smaller sample to generate a profile. With new methods and technology, authorities conducted new searches of the Minnesota DNA databases, as well as databases from neighboring states in April 2007. South Dakota's database discovered a potential match: a man named Randy Lee Royal Swaney. Police took a fresh DNA sample from Randy, who at the time was imprisoned in South Dakota for burglary. It confirmed that his DNA was part of the DNA mixtures discovered on the watch. Additional investigations revealed that his wife, Dawn Swaney, may also have contributed to some of the DNA found on the watch. Without these DNA matches, Randy would not have been involved in the investigation. He wasn't registered as a visitor to the park that day, so didn't get questioned by the police in the early stages of the case. There was also no evidence that he and Carrie had any previous relationship or dealings, either professionally or personally, on any level. This prior lack of connection meant that more evidence was needed to build a believable case. Investigators sought to strengthen Randy's connection to Carrie's passing, or to eliminate him from their investigation. At the crime scene, multiple prints were identified. Randy's right palm print, left palm print, and left thumb print were found on a flyer. The flyers were strewn around the floor near Carrie's body. Randy's finger and palm prints were compared against the latent prints discovered in the contact station. 2 palm prints found on the counter at the contact station were also identified as Randy's. Police examined Dawn's alibi, that's Randy's wife, for the day that Carrie passed. They could indeed confirm that Dawn was at work at the time. She then went on to aid the investigation. She gave police permission to inspect a storage facility that she had rented. They discovered some family photos which would prove to be extremely useful. Randy can be seen in a few of the pictures smoking Doral Light 100s and sporting a Field Ranger wristwatch. Other pictures showed him driving an Oldsmobile Delta 88 in cream with a brown vinyl top, the same vehicle that was seen by witnesses at Carrie's location at around 2:30 p.m. on the day that she passed.
I'm Paul Sopland. I'm an agent with the State Crime Bureau of Minnesota. And Randy, we investigate crimes all over Minnesota type of thing. And we wanted to talk to you a little bit about some things here that had come up.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't understand. I guess, first of all, I'd like to know what's going on.
Well, we wanted to talk to you about, possible crimes you may be able to help us with, or that you could be involved with. I don't know, that type of thing. So that's what we wanted to talk to you about. But you having those rights in mind, you got to decide now. You can stop answering at any time, and that's what I told you. So.
Right. Yeah, and at this point, I guess I would like to have a lawyer because I don't understand what's there.
All right. I guess we are finished. We would like to talk to you. I mean, it's something that, can put you in or put you out.
What way? I don't understand.
Well, I don't know if we tell them. It's in regards to a case in Rock County, Minnesota.
Rock County?
Yeah. A few years.
Okay.
But you lawyered up, so, if you don't want to talk to us, if you change your mind, then you can call us.
Dawn spoke to Randy on the prison phone. The line was tapped and recorded by the police.
What are you doing?
Nothing. You're not coming up to visit?
No.
Why not?
I was talked to yesterday by detectives.
Okay. About what?
I don't know. What was it about, Randy?
I don't know.
They found my DNA and your DNA on a watch in Minnesota in some campground called Blue Mound.
Okay, they didn't tell me that.
Well, that's what they told me. If I'm going to end up going to prison for the rest of my life for something that I didn't do and you did, I'm going to be mad. I'm more mad now. Because there's something else you're not telling me.
No, it's not.
How in the hell do they have our DNA on a watch?
I have no idea.
What do you mean you have no idea? I've not been in Minnesota. Have you?
No.
How about May of 2001, Randy? Like shortly after we got married?
I don't believe it. No.
Don't play stupid, Randy. This is serious. You know something, Randy. You have to tell me. I'm going to end up going to prison for something I don't know nothing about. What happened May 20th, Randy? It was on a Sunday. It was a week before Memorial Weekend.
I don't know.
It's Blue Mound.
I don't know.
Somewhere in Minnesota.
I've never been there.
Somebody has our DNA on a watch.
She recounted a day in May 2001 when the car was suspiciously damaged. She questioned him about his involvement in the death of Carrie. However, he assured her that he was not involved, adding that he hadn't ever even been to the Blue Mound State Park. But this wasn't enough to convince the police that he wasn't involved. Police believe that the following is what happened on the day in question, and what they would put forward in their prosecution argument. Randy went into the contact station that day and stole the cash out of the register, thinking that it was left unattended and that he was alone. However, he wasn't alone. Carrie was nearby. When she challenged him, he punched her in the nose and pulled her into the back room in order to get her to unlock the safe. He put pressure on her neck and used her uniform and necklace as ligatures as he dragged her towards the money. As soon as Carrie opened the safe and Randy had the money that he wanted, things turned even darker. Carrie had seen Randy's face, so he decided to end her life. He got what he went for, so he hit Carrie several times in the head with the engraved rock. A grand jury charged Randy with first-degree murder in 2007. In 2008, the case went to trial. Randy entered a not guilty plea. Randy's own family testified that he smoked Doral Light 100 cigarettes, frequently wore the Field Ranger wristwatch, and that he drove an Oldsmobile Delta 88 in 2001. Two inmates that knew Randy spoke to the jury, telling them that he had confessed to the crime. One inmate claimed that Randy knew the location of the Blue Mound State Park and was aware that his watch had been left there when Carrie was killed. The second inmate claimed that after speaking with the police about the slaying of Carrie, Randy informed him that "they got me this time and I'm gonna do life." The defense argued that Randy was not at the park on the day in question and did not kill Carrie. Randy also gave testimony at the trial. He said that on May the 20th, 2001, he was driving the Oldsmobile on the way to South Dakota. He said that day he went fishing alone. He claimed that the damage to the car mentioned by Dawn resulted from a collision with a tree stump on the way home. Randy admitted in court that despite his initial denials, he may have visited the contact station at some point to inquire about the camping fees, despite first stating he had never even heard of Blue Mound State Park. He claimed, however, that he wasn't there on the day in question. The prosecution questioned him, however, if he hadn't visited in May, how were his finger and palm prints on flyers that had only recently been put out? A park worker testified that she had only distributed those flyers 4 days prior to Carrie's slaying. Randy was now unable to offer an explanation. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Randy was found guilty. He was given a life sentence in prison with no chance of parole. Randy, however, addressed Carrie's family during the sentence hearing and assured them of his innocence. Randy said, "There is still a murderer out there."
That I did not kill Carrie Christine Nelson.
Carrie's father, Stan, sadly passed away in April of 2022. Kendra Hatcher was born and raised in Pleasant Plains, Illinois, and attended dental school there before relocating to Dallas for employment. She had just signed a contract to work at Smile Zone, a dental surgery. The job appeared to fit her well. Kendra was a devout Christian who wanted to use her training as a dentist to serve the community. Children from underprivileged households could receive top-notch dental care at Smile Zone. In my opinion, a very worthwhile career move. Kendra spent her free time volunteering and provided free dental care for children in Ecuador. She also taught Bible study. Both Kendra's personal and professional life were thriving. Her career was on the rise. A relationship blossomed between Kendra and Dr. Ricardo "Ricky" Paniagua, even though they had only been dating for a few months, and Ricky was finishing his dermatology residency at the University of Texas. They had already talked about getting married. The couple had their first date on May the 24th after meeting on Tinder. Ever since then, they were inseparable. They shared the same ideals and aspirations in life. Kendra Hatcher, now 35, on Wednesday, September 7th, 2015, arrived home as she pulled into the Gables Park 17 parking lot. Gables Park 17 was a colourful and opulent apartment building with a saltwater infinity pool, a fitness studio, and a gourmet coffee bar in uptown Dallas, Texas, in the United States. She felt safe living there because there was a 24-hour concierge service, there was CCTV and security. She arrived at 7:42 p.m, excited for the weekend ahead in which she had plans to go to Mexico with Ricky for Labor Day. Two males that were walking through the parking lot heard shouts and then heard a loud popping bang noise. Just a short while after, Kendra pulled into her parking space. A Jeep Cherokee was seen accelerating out of the garage after these loud noises were heard. A resident of the apartment building, Hashem Saad, heard screaming and dialed 911. Police quickly arrived to the luxury apartments. There they found Kendra, still in her car. She had already, sadly, passed. The loud popping bang noise apparently came from a firearm. Because Kendra's purse had been taken, it was initially assumed that a robbery had occurred. A pistol magazine and bullet fragments were discovered on the ground next to her body. Police concluded, however, that the nature of the shot did not suggest that it was a robbery. As they looked further into the situation and assessed the evidence that was present, it all pointed towards an execution. When the shot was discharged, Kendra's hands were up and behind her head according to the gunshot residue discovered. Her upper skull provided the entry point for the projectile, and it exited through her chin. But who would do this to Kendra? She was reportedly liked by everybody. She was charitable, she was professional, she was kind and loving. She was known to help anyone in any way that she could. The apartment complex security footage was obtained by the police. A Jeep Grand Cherokee was seen in the video entering the parking garage at 7:15 p.m. At 7:42 p.m, the video showed Kendra driving into the same garage after returning home. A man was then seen on the footage approaching Kendra's car, and then shortly afterwards he was seen on the footage heading back towards the Jeep. According to the police, this was their main suspect.
Investigators are hoping the images of this older model Jeep Cherokee with damaged or faded paint on the hood with paper license plates may jog someone's memory. The rims are distinctive, and it's hard to tell whether the driver is a man or woman.
Anything more solid than just this picture of the Jeep right now? At this point, no, but I can tell you I spoke with the medical examiner's office late this afternoon, and I am told that Dr. Hatcher did die of a single gunshot wound to the head and neck.
Close friends come to cry, pray, and remember 35-year-old dentist Dr. Kendra Hatcher. She was shot and killed Wednesday evening in the garage of her uptown Dallas luxury apartment.
The security footage showed that there was a second person present. It was a woman in the driving seat of the Jeep. The woman accelerated out of the garage as soon as a man climbed back inside the car. However, it wasn't clear enough for authorities to be able to identify them, so they turned to the public for assistance and shared photos of the Jeep and its driver with the media. A man named Jose Luis Ortiz called the police and admitted that the Jeep belonged to him, but he said he wasn't involved in the attack, nor was he driving the car. According to him, Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, two of his acquaintances, asked him if they might use his Jeep on the morning of September the 2nd. They informed him that Crystal's normal vehicle was having mechanical problems, and they left it with Jose so he could fix it. He reportedly allowed them to use his Jeep whilst he was working on Crystal's car. Brenda invited Jose to meet at a Chili's restaurant that evening, and he accepted. They were scheduled to return the Jeep to him that evening after work, but both Crystal and his Jeep never turned up. Jose said to the police that Brenda was with him at the restaurant at the time of the attack. Later that evening, the Jeep was eventually returned back to Jose's house. As far as police could tell, Jose wasn't expecting his Jeep to be used as a getaway vehicle. He said that he only became aware of it after seeing the police's appeal and recognising his own car. Brenda was questioned by Jose. She responded to his inquiries by denying that it was her in the Jeep. But she subsequently added that Crystal had used it to drive to Kendra's apartment complex to buy drugs, and that whilst there, something had likely gone wrong. Brenda advised Jose not to say anything. She said because it was his Jeep, he may get in problems with the police and endanger his citizenship. This is according to Jose's account to the police. He sensed that Brenda was just attempting to control him. Brenda allegedly proposed that Jose paint the Jeep a new colour and she would cover the cost. Jose, now incredibly suspicious and concerned, reported the incident to the police. Police contacted Brenda Delgado and inquired about Kendra. Brenda admitted to the police that she had never seen Kendra and that she had no idea who she was. When the police asked Brenda where she was at 7:42 PM on September the 2nd, she said that she was with Jose at a Chili's restaurant and produced dinner receipts. She was questioned by police regarding Jose's Jeep. Brenda claimed that she was innocent and she simply handed the Jeep's keys to Crystal. The police then set their sights on Crystal. Crystal Cortez was a single mother and was 23 years old. They questioned her about whether or not she was the woman seen driving a Jeep in the video. She first told authorities that on that night, an armed carjacker forced her to drive to the parking garage in the Jeep. She informed the police that she was there with her 9-year-old child, suggesting that doing what the carjacker said would protect both her and her offspring. However, the video proved that there was no child in the Jeep. This was her first provable lie. Crystal then revised her story. She now claimed to have driven the man to the garage voluntarily and that there had not been a carjacking. But she also said that she believed it was only going to be a robbery. She strangely stated that she had no knowledge of the shooting, which would be strange as she was at the location at the time that it happened. Even though she now said that she did believe it was for a robbery, the police asked why she consented to drive there in the first place, and she responded that it was because Brenda had requested her to. She then informed the police that Kendra was dating Brenda's ex-boyfriend, and that this must be the reason why Brenda targeted Kendra. From 2012 through to the start of 2015, Brenda and Ricky had a sporadic relationship, according to the police. In February 2013, Ricky ended the relationship with Brenda for good and started dating other women. Ricky knew that it was serious when he met Kendra in May, so out of politeness, he sent Brenda an email to let her know that he was now in a committed relationship. Brenda wasn't happy when Ricky started dating Kendra, but Ricky was unaware of just how scorned Brenda was. She appeared fine and expressed her wishes that they could continue to be friends. Ricky, though, must have had some level of suspicion about Brenda. He purposefully never told Brenda Kendra's name. Crystal, now realising that she could be in real trouble, sought to negotiate a plea agreement and decided to testify in exchange for a lighter punishment as the questioning went on and the evidence against her grew. She told the police that Brenda had planned the murder and wanted Kendra permanently out of the picture. Crystal claims that after meeting Brenda, she started preparing for Kendra's slaying just 2 weeks later. So how did things escalate so quickly? When Brenda's relationship with Ricky ended, the police found that she wasn't simply sad about it. She was also fascinated and obsessed with Ricky. She was utterly determined to get him back, no matter what the cost. Despite the fact that her life had begun to fall apart around her, she feigned to Ricky that she was content with just being friends, but she started skipping work and her grades began to fall. She instead started working on getting Ricky back as if it was her full-time job. Brenda hacked Ricky's email account and cyberstalked both him and Kendra, learning about their travel arrangements and planned activities. She started to dislike Kendra. She thought that Kendra had replaced her, stolen a life that should have been hers. Crystal claims that Brenda said that she wanted to get rid of Kendra Hatcher. Crystal agreed to assist Brenda when she asked if she knew anyone up to the grim task of eliminating Kendra. They immediately began devising a scheme. They got together frequently and came up with a variety of plans. Initially, they intended to pull the trigger on Kendra after injecting her with a sedative. Brenda questioned Crystal, who was living in a poorer area, about whether she could find someone to carry out the execution. They drove around and approached various individuals to see if they might assist. Later, they encountered Christopher Love, a man that was willing to help. He agreed to assist and they spoke about several strategies for taking Kendra out. They all agreed that a simple firearm would be the most effective method of execution because it would be quick. According to Crystal, Brenda agreed to give her $500 in exchange for her part in the execution, and Christopher Love was to be given a mixture of money and narcotics. A plan was devised to end Kendra on September the 2nd because they knew she and Ricky had plans for the Labor Day weekend. They knew that the couple would be leaving Dallas on September the 3rd to take a vacation in Mexico. Brenda knew that they had plans to then go to San Francisco when they returned back, so she knew they had to do it before then. Since Brenda had put Ricky's iPhone account onto another phone and used that to track and stalk him, she was fully aware of all their plans and activities. Brenda stated to Crystal that she wanted the hit to seem like a botched robbery. Brenda and Crystal made a decision to follow Kendra to observe her day-to-day activities. By doing this, they believed they would be able to pinpoint the perfect location for the attack. They tailed her car to work. Brenda and Crystal sat outside a Salvation Army and watched her through binoculars. They then followed her home from work and figured out how to get into the parking garage. They discovered that if they parked in a visitor's space first and then followed another car into the garage, that there would be no trouble in getting inside. To be sure that these routines were regular and nothing changed, they repeated their routine of stalking for a few days. Brenda, Crystal and Christopher completed one final run-through the day before on September the 1st and timed it. The attack was then due to be carried out by Crystal and Christopher alone the following day on September the 2nd. Brenda and Crystal met Jose early that morning to pick up the Jeep. They then went to a Jack in the Box restaurant to pick up Christopher. Brenda was then dropped off at a Carrollton library and Crystal and Christopher travelled on by themselves to Kendra's apartment building. When they arrived, they waited for roughly 30 minutes across the street before instead driving to Kendra's place of employment. Quite disturbingly, Crystal then briefly left to do the school run. She then returned once more to Kendra's workplace. Kendra then finished work and left, trailed by the Jeep. Crystal and Christopher lost Kendra in the traffic, so they made the decision to head straight back to Kendra's apartment building. They arrived first and entered the garage just as planned. Kendra returned and pulled into her parking space. Christopher then exited the vehicle. He then walked over to Kendra's car and pulled the trigger. Kendra was now permanently out of the picture for Brenda. Crystal now claimed that although she heard the shooting, she didn't actually see it. Crystal and Christopher then left the parking garage. She then dropped Christopher off at home. Crystal then picked up her son before meeting Brenda at Jose's house to return his Jeep. The case then went to trial. Crystal Cortez agreed to be the prosecution's key witness as part of the agreement that she made.
We would follow her from her job to her house. We pretty much just found out her daily routine.
Both Christopher and Crystal were accused of murder, and their trials were held separately. Crystal received a 35-year prison term in exchange for her testimony and guilty plea to a murder charge. When Christopher's car was searched, a firearm was discovered in a side compartment by the vehicle. Forensics matched his firearm to Kendra's attack. By the time the trial took place, Christopher was ready to talk. He admitted to being hired by Brenda, hired to carry out the attack on Kendra. He also stated that Brenda promised to pay him in cash and narcotics.
What's even more incredible is that investigators had phone calls recorded from the jail. They are of conversations between Love and his girlfriend. She asked him, "Why didn't you get rid of the gun if you used it to kill Dr. Hatcher?" He replies, "I know, it was stupid as," and then he uses an expletive. Love told detectives that even though he was at the scene, it was Crystal Cortez who pulled the trigger. Also, detectives say that the video refutes that. His lawyers are trying to paint him, though, as the patsy who will probably get the death penalty if he is convicted, while Brenda Delgado and Crystal Cortez, who are the alleged masterminds behind all of this, will not face the same punishment.
When I heard that this had happened to her, and no, I'm getting off topic, but I couldn't imagine who would do it. I couldn't imagine who would hurt her because nobody disliked her.
Christopher was found guilty and was sentenced to death.
It's been devastating. Nobody can get any sleep. Nobody can eat. We've all been trying to be brave for each other, and it's hard. I do feel sorry about the death of the dentist, and I do feel sorry about her family and that they have to go through something like this. And I don't think that any mother should see her child die.
Brenda attempted to evade her fate. She spent nearly 7 months in hiding before going to trial. She was even included on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. She was arrested in Mexico in April 2016. Only on the condition that she would not be sentenced to death, Mexican authorities agreed to extradite her. She was charged with murder after being returned to the United States. At first, Brenda's family and Ricky didn't think that she could be involved. They knew her as a wholesome, loving woman with strong Christian and family values. When he stopped their relationship, according to Ricky, they remained good friends. He even texted her the night that Kendra was shot to let her know what had happened. Brenda pledged to assist him however she could. Brenda entered a not guilty plea, and her defense claimed that she had an alibi and receipts to show that she was at Chili's restaurant when Kendra passed. Her defense said that Brenda wasn't present when Kendra was wounded. However, the prosecution's claim was that Kendra was murdered as part of a murder-for-hire plot run by Brenda. The court was informed by prosecution that Brenda wanted Kendra out of the picture for a reason. She perceived her as a barrier to achieving her goals of reuniting with Ricky once more. And that simply couldn't happen if Kendra was still around. Brenda's cousin testified in court that Brenda suffered from depression as a result of her breakup from Ricky. He claimed that Brenda offered to pay him if he used a baseball bat to attack Kendra. He didn't accept the offer. A friend of Brenda's, Jennifer, testified that Brenda was upset with Ricky for ending their relationship and that she was very fascinated with him. She said before the court that Brenda read all of his emails and followed his whereabouts on his phone. She revealed to the jury that Brenda had access to his financial accounts and even had a copy of his house key. Brenda asked many people to eliminate Kendra. Prosecution claimed that she had taken advantage of Crystal. Crystal, a struggling single mother earning $11 an hour, aspired to be like Brenda, a woman with her own apartment, education and money. Brenda was someone that Crystal looked up to. According to testimony given in court, she gave Crystal $500, and the police also discovered a receipt to back this up.
Are you guilty of the capital murder of Kendra Hatcher?
Yes, I am.
Is Christopher Love guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher?
Yes, he is.
Is Brenda Delgado guilty of the murder of Kendra Hatcher?
Yes, she is.
Those 9 seconds from Crystal Cortez this afternoon sums up nearly 4 years of work for prosecutors to try and show Brenda Delgado as the mastermind in the murder of Kendra Hatcher. Cortez, appearing today in prison scrubs, is already serving a 35-year prison sentence for murder.
The court was informed that Brenda and Crystal spoke to one another 89 times over a 2-week period, from the 22nd of August to the 4th of September, and that cell phone data also connected her to Christopher prior to the murder. After only 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Brenda guilty.
You, Brenda Delgado, have earned your spot on this earth behind cold steel bars for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. And if justice could have handed you a death sentence, make no mistake, I would have been there front and center.
She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Do you believe justice was served here? What do you think of the sentences given? Let me know in the comments. This story all started with a fisherman, a man who'd cast his line into the still green water of a lagoon in Hortalandia, a quiet city on the edge of Sao Paulo. The water was calm that morning. He noticed something tangled up in the reeds. At first it looked like trash, a blue tarp, some sheets. But as he got closer, the smell hit him. He stopped moving. He knew something was dreadfully wrong. He called the police immediately, and within the hour, that lagoon, once peaceful, once silent, was now swarming with flashing lights and officers combing through the water. When they lifted the tarp out, everyone froze. Inside it was the body of a girl. Her remains had been wrapped in sheets and tied down with stones. It appeared that someone had wanted her to stay hidden forever. And then a shocking discovery. On her back, carved in large letters, were the initials PCC. Those feared letters mean only one thing in Brazil: the Primeiro Comando de Capital, one of the country's most dangerous criminal factions. So, police thought they'd stumbled into something massive, a cartel-style message, a stark warning. The girl had been missing since July the 12th. Her family had been posting her photo online, begging anyone for help. Her mother, Priscilla, wrote, "Please, if anyone sees her, tell her to come home. She's my whole life." But by July the 18th, it was too late. When police told the family what they'd found near the lagoon, Priscilla collapsed. Her stepfather couldn't even speak. They just couldn't understand. How could something so horrific happen to a girl like Nicole? And why the letters PCC? Something about this scene just felt off. The sheets that she had been wrapped in didn't seem random. In fact, it came from a nearby house. And the tarp, that was recognized instantly by a man who lived less than a mile away. In fact, he said it belonged to his son. The truth was now starting to form piece by piece. This one is absolutely unreal, and the twists keep on coming. Before any of this, Nicole was just a normal teenager, a bright, funny, artistic 15-year-old from Sao Paulo. She loved taking photos, scrolling on social media, and laughing with her friends. Her teachers said that she was the kind of student who made their days lighter just by walking into the classroom. She wasn't rebellious, she wasn't lost, she didn't live a dramatic life. She was loved and she was happy. When the school year ended, she begged her parents to spend her winter break in Hortalandia, a smaller town where her grandfather lived. She said it would be nice to slow down, to visit old friends, and one friend in particular, a boy that she used to know. That boy was 17, and his name was Enrique. They'd known each other since childhood, although arguably they were still there, and they'd studied together before her family moved away. And like a lot of adolescent so-called love stories, it all started out innocent. Daily text messages, video calls, little heart emojis sent before bed. But lately, the tone had changed. According to her stepfather, Nicole had started hiding her phone more often. She even told her mother that the boy was different now, more jealous, more demanding. Sometimes he'd ask where she was, who she was with, and what she was wearing. Her mother just tried to brush this off as teenage drama. But a week later, Nicholie said something that her family would never forget. "He's not like he used to be. Sometimes he scares me." At the time, they thought she meant emotionally, but they had no idea how literal those words could become. On June the 29th, Nicholie left for Hortolandia. Her mother watched her pack her bag, a few outfits, her sketchbook, a phone charger. She hugged her and told her to be safe, and then promised to call her every day. For the first week, everything seemed fine. She sent selfies from her grandfather's garden, videos of the dog, messages filled with hearts. But then on July the 10th, her text messages slowed down. Her friends noticed that she wasn't online as much, and when one of them DM'd her, the reply felt off. They said it was short and cold, almost like it wasn't her writing it at all. And then by July the 12th, everything went silent. Her mother tried calling but received no answer. Text messages, nothing. She reached out to the boyfriend, Enrique. He picked up and his voice was calm. He simply said, "We broke up. She left the house on her own. I haven't seen her since." There wasn't too much to question here. Another failed teenage relationship. But the family later realized that one line of what he said stuck out. Something that he said before the family even realized she was truly missing. That night, Nicholie's grandfather filed a missing persons report. The police began searching the neighborhood, checking bus terminals, questioning anyone who might have seen her. At first, it looked like a runaway case. But then, investigators spoke to a neighbor, and that changed everything. The neighbor said that she had seen Nicholie, actually at Enrique's house that weekend, and she remembered it because she heard yelling. Also kind of strange was that she didn't just hear one girl and one guy arguing. Instead, she was sure that she heard two girls' voices and one boy's. She thought it was just an argument, but when she peeked out of her window, she did see something that she couldn't explain. A wheelbarrow being pushed down the street at night. The pieces were now all aligning. The lagoon, the tarp, the sheet, and soon a chilling detail from Nicholie's own mother would make everything even worse. A few weeks before the crime, a girl had messaged Nicholie's mother's husband, her stepfather, online. She was pretending to be Nicholie's classmate. She asked for her social media accounts, asked where she lived and who she was dating. At the time, it seemed pretty harmless, but later, investigators would discover who that girl really was. By now, things were already way out of control, and police started to hone in on two suspects. When police realized that Nicholie's ex-boyfriend Enrique was no longer at home, they knew that time was running out, and they knew that the further away he got, the colder the trail would become. They issued an alert across Sao Paulo state. Posters, patrols, checkpoints, all of them brought in nothing. It was like the ground had just swallowed him up. But then, 2 days later, his father got a message. "Dad, I swear I didn't do anything. Some guys from Sao Paulo are after me. I can't go home." However, unluckily for him, investigators had already checked his phone records, and strangely they couldn't find any kind of threats made towards him. There were no messages, no guys from Sao Paulo. So unless proof arose, the only real explanation was that he was lying, and wherever he wasn't alone. Detectives began retracing his steps. That's when they realized he had one person left who might help him. His grandmother, who lived nearly 500 kilometers away, in the small town of Cornelio Procopio in Parana. So police reached out to local units there, and they told them to keep watch. Within 48 hours, they had a hit. A neighbor had spotted two teenagers, a boy and a girl, sneaking into an older woman's house late at night. They said they were carrying backpacks, and hauntingly, they never saw them coming out. On the morning of July the 20th, police surrounded the home, but what followed wasn't like a scene from an action movie. Instead, the door opened quietly, and there they were, Nicholie's ex-boyfriend, Enrique, and a 14-year-old girl, Evelyn. Both of them seemed super calm, for a couple that had the Brazilian mafia after them. The girl crossed her arms, staring at the floor. The boy just said, "We knew you'd find us." Inside the house, police found their phones. They found their clothes and a note scribbled on torn notebook paper. It read, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." The couple was brought back to Sao Paulo and then placed in juvenile custody. When questioned separately, their stories started falling apart immediately, like a Dollar Tree napkin lost in a jacuzzi. At first, the boy said that Nicolee came to the house to talk, that she had then gotten angry, picked up a sharp kitchen implement, and then she attacked him. He said that he simply reacted, that everything that happened was all self-defense. But then investigators asked a simple question. If it was self-defense, why wrap the body? Why tie it with stones? Why flee to another state? And Enrique didn't seem to have any answers for those questions. Then they spoke to Evelyn. Her version was different, and not just a little bit different, but completely different. She said that she was there when it happened, but that she didn't touch Nicolee. She said Enrique lost control, that he snapped. When police told her that the body was dismembered, they said her face went pale. Evelyn said, "I didn't know about that part." But there was one issue with that statement. She did know, she must have known, because at that very moment, forensic teams were matching her fingerprints to the tape that had been used to seal up the tarp. Detectives noticed something else strange, something that seemed like they were trying to formulate a story. Both Enrique and Evelyn used exactly the same words to describe Nicolee. The word jealous came up again and again. She couldn't accept the breakup. She attacked us out of jealousy. But jealousy couldn't explain what came next, because as investigators dug deeper, they discovered something horrifying. This crime was not a spontaneous crime of passion. It wasn't self-defense. It had all been horrifically planned. It was Evelyn that had been messaging Nicolee's stepfather, as well as Nicolee herself, in the days leading up to the murder. She was simply pretending to be someone else. She asked to meet up. She said that she wanted to talk, and so she lured Nicolee to Enrique's house, and now the trap was set, ready to snap shut. Even after the actual act was carried out, it doesn't seem that any of them felt any remorse. Of course, there was no way to undo what was already done, but they didn't confess or try and get help. Instead, they cleaned up. Then they packed their bags and fled. But even after their confessions, something about them unsettled investigators. Strangely, they weren't super emotional and remorseful. They said that they just stared. But when investigators checked their phones, they found something else chilling. According to the lead detective, they didn't show remorse. They just said it wasn't what they wanted, and that they panicked. To him, though, it was obvious. This was all deliberate and planned, and he called it what it was, an act of cruelty. Back at the crime scene, forensic teams reconstructed what had happened, and the picture that they painted would haunt every officer who was working on the case. Inside Enrique's house, investigators pieced together the final moments of Nicolee's life. Every room told a fragment of the story. The red on the floor, the drag marks, the missing bed sheets, and what those clues combined revealed was terrifying. According to investigators, the three of them were inside for less than an hour before that neighbor heard the shouting. Then a door slammed, something heavy dropped, followed by a deafening silence. Police believe that the argument began in the bedroom, and at some point it turned violent. But here's where things kind of stop making sense. As we know, Enrique had been telling the police that Nicolee had attacked him with a sharp implement, that he was only defending himself. But the forensic team found no evidence of a struggle, not one defensive wound on either of the suspects. Meanwhile, the marks on Nicolee's body told a completely different story. She hadn't just been attacked in a defensive manner, she had been overpowered. And then the violence escalated beyond anything that could be called defense. Police discovered two sharp weapons in the house, both with traces of Nicolee's DNA. One was cleanly washed and put back in its drawer. The other had been left in the sink. the handle sticky with red, and the blade bent and dulled. Next to it, on the counter, was a hammer. Its head was still stained with a dark red film. They found streaks leading from the bedroom to the backyard, a path to where the wheelbarrow had been stored. That's when police realised they'd simply wheeled the remains out the back gate, down a dirt path, and then into the lagoon just blocks away. One small but clever detail confirmed it. When divers recovered the tarp, they found pieces of gravel embedded in the fabric. That very same gravel matched that found in the yard behind Enrique's house. He hadn't even left the neighbourhood. And then there were the letters PCC. They were just a red herring. There was absolutely no connection, no gang ties, no messages sent. The letters had been carved post-mortem. Whether this was planned or a moment of genius is unknown. Those letters weren't actually meant to represent the fear and power of a gang, but instead to simply confuse the police and to try and get away with murder. It was all theatre, a distraction. This guy's name is insanely long, so here we go. Detective Jose Regino Melo Legas Filo later said it was a deliberate attempt to disguise the real motive. They wanted to make it look like organised crime, but it was a personal act, an act of cruelty. Every discovery pushed one truth closer to the surface. This was always about jealousy, hatred, and control. The detail that broke the lead detective came from a single statement by Enrique. When asked why they didn't call for help, he said, "We didn't think anyone would believe us." But he knew that they knew what they'd done, and they knew it was unforgivable. Forensic teams wrapped up their search after 2 days, and every piece of evidence told the same story. But even after the facts were clear, one question lingered on. What turns two teenagers into this? What makes them believe they can destroy a life and still just walk away? To Nicole's mother, that question never had an answer. On social media, she wrote, "The worst pain a mother can go through. Eternal mourning. You will be loved and remembered forever, my princess. Justice must be done." Those words spread across Brazil, shared thousands of times. And now the people demanded justice. And soon, Nicole's name became more than a simple tragedy. It would become a movement. When the news broke, Brazil stopped. Images of Nicole's smile filled every TV screen, every timeline, every phone. A girl once known only in her small circle was now the face of something much larger, a nation's breaking point. This wasn't simply about what happened to her, it was about who had done it. 2 juveniles, one of them not even old enough to drive. It was cruel, calculated, and cold. The police chief gave a press statement that week. He said, "This was a crime of extreme violence and precision. This was premeditated." The story spread like wildfire. Headlines called it the case that shattered Hortolandia. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding white balloons and photos of Nicole. They shouted one word: justice. Both Enrique and Evelyn were officially charged under Brazil's juvenile statute, the highest level of punishment allowed for minors. They were taken to a youth detention centre in Campinas. However, for many, this was not enough, and that is because under Brazilian law, no matter how severe the crime, minors can only be held for a maximum of 3 years. Yes, you heard that right. In this case, that means 3 years for a life. That realization is what ignited a national movement. It began online, a petition for Nicole's law. The messaging was clear. Brazil needed tougher justice for violent youth offenders, and better systems to stop this kind of cruelty before it even started. Within just days, it had tens of thousands of signatures, and the description read, "Nicole's death is a cry for help, echoing across our country. No family should endure such pain, while offenders walk free after a few years." And so, bubbling away under the surface was a mixture of outrage and heartbreak. Punishment alone wasn't really enough. The country now wanted to know, how did 2 people of that age learn to act and lie like such horrific criminals? To manipulate, plan, and hide something so horrific, and to do it all without emotion. Psychologists weighed in. Experts called it a case of youth psychopathy, a rare mix of emotional detachment, of jealousy, and fantasy thinking amplified by online culture. Others said it was proof of a deeper social rot, the kind that grows when violence becomes entertainment, which leads to empathy fading. As days passed, Portlandia returned to its normal rhythm. Buses, markets, children walking to school. But near that lagoon, people still leave flowers, white roses, letters. Someone painted a small mural there, Nicole's face surrounded by wings with the words, "Justice for our angel." Her mother visits often. She sits by the water, holding a framed photo of her beloved daughter. She once told a reporter, "I don't come here to cry. I come here to remind her she's still loved." As of now, the investigation is technically complete. All testimonies are taken, forensic reports have been filed, and the suspects remain detained. But to those who knew Nicole, closure doesn't exist. It really can't. Justice feels too small of a word, because no sentence can measure the life that she would have lived, the college that she might have attended, the songs that she would have danced to, the people that she could have loved. And well, in this case, justice only looks like 3 years, anyway. In the months after the crime, something remarkable happened. Nicole's story began sparking school programs, online safety campaigns, and local discussions about teen jealousy and violence. So, in a way, Nicole does live on, as a movement grows around her memory. And so the story ends where it began, at a quiet lagoon in Portlandia. The water looks calm once again. You never know what had happened there. But, beneath the surface, in the mud and the weeds, is a dark memory that no one in that city will ever forget. A reminder that sometimes evil doesn't come from the shadows, nor from gangs or ugly monsters. Sometimes it comes from wearing a familiar friendly face, smiling yet unrecognizable until it's far too late.